Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone. Some surprises also, Professor. Hello there. To our World Day commemoration here at the United Nations. You may enjoy some of the slides that we're playing, a little slideshow of older persons in Serbia as we're starting. We just wanted to get you into the mood and set the framework because this is the way we'd like to see older persons around the world treated and experiencing life in a very pleasant and safe environment. Today's program is going to be on the particular issue of financial exploitation, material exploitation, abuse and violence of older persons around the globe. And it's a bit narrow considering the larger issue of elder abuse itself, or abuse of the older person. But we wanted to show how it applies throughout all cultures, all countries, every inch of the globe you can find it in different ways. But maybe you'll see as the presenters give you their information that there's a root to this evil. And obviously we all know the term, money is the root of all evil. So money, greed, and other nefarious things I think you'll find pop out in these different presentations. So we're going to start this afternoon with a very honored guest who is the ambassador, the permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations in New York, and Ambassador Garcia Mortan. And he is going to be representing today the group of Friends of Older Persons in their statement. As you know, the group of Friends of Older Persons New York has come together to help promote the issues, the human rights, and protection and promotion of older persons here. And there's also another group of friends that's been established in Geneva. The missions are a bit different. We're particularly appreciative of the mission here, the mission of the group of friends. And we look to work together with them in many more events. So without any further delay, I will turn things over to the ambassador to welcome you and to give his address. Ambassador?
Well, thank you so much, Susan, and I'm very, very pleased to be here, and thank you very much for coming. It's lunchtime. We didn't offer nothing to eat, so it's a double thank you. First of all, as I said, it's an honor, and I will talk on behalf of the group of friends of older persons at the United Nations in New York. It's Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Qatar, Slovenia, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, and my own country, Argentina. First of all, allow me to thank the organizers for convening this event in commemoration of the 6th anniversary of the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. INPEA, the NGO Committee on Aging, and DESA, the group of friends, has proudly joined as co-sponsors. The commemoration of this day was officially recognized by the United Nations in 2011 with a purpose to raise the world's voices to fight against the abuse and suffering inflicted on older persons. The theme of this year's observance of the World Day is Understanding and Ending Financial Abuse of Older People, a human rights issue. And this is a reminder that elder abuse is a very real and serious problem which can manifest itself in different actions and forms. In this regard, financial abuse of older people can be defined as the unauthorized, illegal or improper exploitation or use of funds, property, or any other resources of the older person. It's a form of violence against older persons and severely affects the enjoyment of their human rights, particularly the right to live free from violence and discrimination and the right to have a life of dignity in their old age. It may trigger poverty, hunger, homelessness, and lead to other types of abuses, constituting an issue which deserves the attention and immediate action of the international community. Also, financial abuse of elder people is hard to detect, as it is often perpetrated by family members, and it is unreported, as older persons can often find it difficult to act against family members out of feelings of shame or guilt. As member states that promote the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the attainment of the SDGs, and in order to fulfill the pledge of leaving no one behind, it is imperative to consider that older persons are specific right holders who have contributed and continue to do so, and additionally play an active role in the many areas of development. In that sense, states and the international community should recognize them as key stakeholders in the formulation and implementation of public policies aimed at promoting social and economic development and the full and effective protection, promotion, and enjoyment of their human rights. In this regard, we recognize the fundamental role of older persons in attaining the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including its Sustainable Development Goals, as are beneficiaries and active players in development. We call especially to prevent and end all forms of abuse against older persons, as it is decisive if we are to attain the SDG. In addition, Target 17.18 includes a clear call for all relevant population-based indicators to be disaggregated by age as a means of ensuring that the impact of development policies on persons of all ages will be monitored and that persons of all ages will have a better chance to participate in and benefit from development. Member states are further committed to consider population trends and projections in national, rural, and urban development strategies and policies. To take into account population trends and to effectively collect data related to older people, I will allow to understand the situation of older people according to its particularities, and at the same time strengthen and better focus policies and strategies aimed at protect the dignity and human rights of older persons. Any older person can potentially become a victim of financial abuse. That's why it is important to consider all potential ways to protect them and to reduce the possibility of abuse through the development of international standards and national policies, specifically designed to face and fight against elder financial abuse. Men and women experience old age differently. While both older men and older women face age-based discrimination, older women also face the additional cumulative effects of gender-based discrimination through their lives. The combination of discrimination on the basis of age and sex puts women at more of a disadvantage in old age than men. Older women continue to suffer from discriminatory laws and practices that render them more vulnerable to abuse and violence. In this sense, we express our deep concern about the fact that neglect, abuse, and violence against older women often go undetected. It is fundamental in this regard to foster the capacity of states to more effectively collect data, statistics, and quality information, disaggregated by sex, age, and other relevant factors as necessary, such as marital status, disability, in order to better assess the situation of older persons and to encourage the international community and the relevant agencies of the United Nations system within their respective mandates to support national efforts to provide funding for research and data collection initiatives on older persons and violence against older women, in order to better understand the challenges and opportunities presented by population aging and to provide policymakers with more accurate and more specific information with regard to a gender perspective on aging. To conclude, the group of friends reiterates and renews its commitment to promote and ensure the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for older persons, including by taking measures to combat discrimination on the basis of age and sex, as well as neglect, abuse, and violence, and to address issues related to social integration. We also express our confidence that in the upcoming session of the open-ended working group on aging, we will be able to hold fruitful discussion on the issue of elder abuse, which should lead to achieving concrete progress in the process of development of an international instrument for the protection and promotion of the human rights of older persons. We all know that it is not an easy task, and that, surprisingly or not, there is still no consensus as to the need to have such a devoted legal instrument. However, we are convinced that through events and discussions such as today's, we will be able to show the entire international community the many issues that affect the enjoyment of the human rights of the elderly, and that the current setting of the Human Rights Treaty body system is not sufficient in order to protect and promote the rights and dignity of a growing segment of the population that by 2050 will outnumber children and young people globally. Finally, allow us to recognize the valuable efforts by civil society in improving the situation of older persons worldwide and to reiterate that the group of friends of older persons will continue its commitment to work tirelessly to promote the rights and dignity of all older persons around the world. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the ambassador has said it all. Should half of this come true shortly, we'd be in very good stead. I particularly appreciate your mentioning the role of civil society, but we have a shared responsibility. Obviously, you and the group of friends, El Salvador and the others, are helping to move the issues forward to the greatest extent that you can, but also older persons around the world have to be motivated and brought together so their voices can be heard at the local levels. And we hope to continue doing that to help you and help us all to reach our goal. So thank you, Ambassador. We're now going to move to a panel presentation. And you'll see at the agenda that we have a few videos coming in because we really wanted to bring you in a diverse review from around the world. But, you know, with the economic situation being what it is and people's times, and I'll tell you the truth, it's success that's really in our way. The real problem is that World Elder Abuse Awareness Day has been so successful that so many people are working and celebrating and commemorating within their own communities, putting on huge events, that they weren't able to travel. So thanks to technology and older persons getting to use older technology is very important, we're bringing you their voices. So we're going to start with the first video. And it will be my colleague from Canada. You may have called Marie Bellou, who has a very important chair in Canada. But listen to some of the undertones of what she's going to say about her report on older persons' financial exploitation and how not-for-profits in Canada are addressing this. Thank you. Emile, please.
Good day. My name is Marie Beaulieu. I'm a university professor at University of Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada. And I'm also the chair-holder of a research chair on mistreatment of older adults. It's my pleasure today to talk to you about a research where I am the principal investigator. It's a research on practice and non-for-profit agencies involved in actions to counter financial abuse. We're funded by the Canadian government, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and it's a 3 years project from 2015 and 2018. So the method is 5 case studies with non-for-profit agencies all around Canada. We did group interviews with administrators and also individual interviews with paid practitioners, volunteers because they're really important in this field, and also a series of older adults who have been receiving services because they were financially exploited. So it's very rare to have the point of view of older adults, so it's my pleasure to talk about those today. And actually what I would like to share with you is I would like to share with you 3 issues that are really important. The first one is the shock that the older adult did express regarding the fact of experiencing financial exploitation. So the majority of them were actually abused by family members, and the others were by neighbors or people that they knew pretty well. A big surprise for me was actually to see a few cases along the same pattern. It was older women abused by their daughters, and especially the new partners of their daughters. So in those cases, the partners were really ready to do almost anything to be able to grab the money of their new mother-in-law when they realized that actually she had a bit of financial and material confidence. So actually those women said no to abuse and they asked for help, and the majority of them were actually asking for help after going to conferences. But the big shock for those women was actually to lose not only the money, but to lose the contact with the daughters. So it was a real pain of actually saying goodbye to a privileged relationship and also asking why their daughter chose such a partner. So this shows that in financial abuse, for sure consequences can be financial abuse, but actually consequences can be highly emotional abuse. The second one would be seeking for help. So the majority of those people seeked for help by themselves. And actually what they did is they went to conferences or activities talking about financial abuse. And after the activity, they decided to go and talk to the volunteers or the paid practitioners that were actually facilitating those activities. So this shows the importance that we need to actually to continue to finance those conferences and those sensitization activities. And for me, it's a real concern because all the 5 non-for-profit agencies that are part of our study are all having troubles really trying to stay stable in offering their services. In other words, each year they have to run for money, and this is a real challenge. And I think as a society, we need to invest in those type of activities. And the last thing that I would like to raise, which is the third issue, is actually older adults don't know that much about their rights. So when we asked the older adults at the end of the interview what we could do to better improve the services and better also answer to their needs, what they said is that they were really not knowing what were their rights. And this is a real concern to me, especially knowing that supposed to be developed countries are actually saying that older adults don't need specific rights because they're covered with all the rights of regular adults. Well, this shows to me that even if older adults are covered, they don't know about it. So we have a strong mandate in teaching the rights and actually being certain that not only people know their rights, but actually that we can have some activities that will help them to be recognized, and also to have some activities where they can go and ask for help when those rights are challenged. I really wish you a very pleasant, good WEAAD 2017. Good day. My name.
Well, I think there were some lessons from that. And the more important one, I think, is that older adults don't know their rights. And if they don't know them, they can't access them, they can't protect themselves. But when they have access to help and they're seeking help, that they may choose to get help at these conferences and whatnot that Maria's talked about. Now, all of this, it will be available for you on the web, the full videos and more information behind it, the details of her work. So don't be concerned about that, and we'll give that to you. So we're going to move now to India, to Mumbai, and we're going to see a rollout of a launch of a white paper by Money Life Foundation, by the editor of Money Life magazine, Sucheta Dali. And this is the first ever work that's been done, independent work that's been done in India on retirement homes. And so, Emile, if you could please. Yes, thank you.
Greetings from India. I'm Sucheta Dalal, founder trustee of Money Life Foundation.
And I'm Devashish Basu, also founder trustee of Money Life Foundation.
We thank you for giving Money Life Foundation an opportunity to share with you the first ever study on retirement homes in India and to participate in your deliberations on financial abuse of senior citizens through this little video.
I noticed that the part of the theme of your deliberations includes new abuse in property-related transactions. Our study pertains to exactly one such new area, which includes well-to-do upper and middle-class senior citizens.
Allow me to give you a little background. Traditionally, Indians lived in joint families with seniors being taken care of by the younger members and the younger children being taken care of by the seniors. But all this has changed over the last 25 years with economic development and a move towards more nuclear families.
Over the past 25 years, a growing number of affluent Indians have gone abroad and settled over there. The parents of these children prefer to stay back home where they have deep social and cultural ties which they do not want to sever. They are also fairly well-to-do and have their own houses and apartments.
However, with age, the need for companionship of people with similar interests and similar backgrounds has made people move towards retirement homes. They also want to get away from the bother of daily household chores and finding domestic help, which is increasingly getting more difficult.
A very picturesque hill station in southern India called the Coimbatore developed as an early hub for retirement homes and townships catering to the elderly middle class in around 2002-2003.
Our study of the problems affecting senior citizens began sometime in 2013 when Mr. R. Narayan, who used to be a former managing director of a listed company, approached me. He had moved to Coimbatore along with a couple of his relatives. This is a beautiful resort-like hill station, and he hoped to live there for the rest of his days, but it was not to be.
Mr. Narayanan met Mr. Krishnamurthy, former captain with India's national airline Air India. He was living in Chennai. As he grew older, he was attracted to the prospect of living in this lovely retirement home in Coimbatore in a fairly luxurious environment.
Things were blissful initially. However, as India's economy boomed and real estate prices soared, those responsible for running the retirement home probably turned greedy. The business was structured as a not-for-profit organization that leased out individual dwelling units to the elders.
When land prices rose sharply, they discovered that they could rent out the dwellings at a significantly higher rates. This led to subtle harassment of those with long-term leases. It included repeated increases in fees without providing any justification, a reduction of promised services, and deterioration in quality of amenities.
Mr. Krishnamurthy tells us that there was pressure on the existing people to leave so that their dwellings could be leased out again at a significantly higher lease as well as deposit.
When Mr. Krishnamurthy and Mr. Narayanan, who has a management degree and a law degree, protested and demanded the same disclosure of finances, they were subjected to harassment. Both were denied food, the common cafeteria, and essential home services. Other residents and staff were encouraged to ostracize them. Mr. Narayan's elderly relatives in the late 80s were threatened with eviction.
Initially, Mr. Narayan and Ms. Krishnamurthy began to write letters to the local authorities. When this didn't yield any results, a couple of years later in 2015, by which time Mr. Krishnamurthy was 82, they decided to approach the Madras High Court. They filed a writ petition in June 2015. Mr. Narayan, as it happens, is a lawyer with a master's degree in law, and he helped Ms. Krishnamurthy file this petition. The two established in court that there were no guidelines or regulations governing the operation and management of retirement homes with specific provisions to safeguard the rights of vulnerable category of citizens who are living on their savings.
Well, I'm sorry that that sort of ended abruptly, but we have a little bit of a time crunch here, and so if we have time to go back to the remainder of this, we'll play it after. But again, I said it to be available. But you can see the issues that are happening here in this retirement home. These people are well-to-do, not thinking that they're ever going to have to face this type of abuse. Imagine being denied food, being banned, shunned by your neighbors under the coercion of this retirement home. So this is an issue. When they said it's a new issue, a new type of abuse, well, we've been dealing with this in the United States about 1995, 98. We passed a law on assisted living homes, and we have a lot of legislation to protect against this exact same thing. I was working on the same problem one day when I started to learn about retirement homes. So we see the universality of it all. So we're now going to go to Serbia. And you were enjoying some lovely still shots of the Serbian older persons originally. And Natasha Todorovic is going to speak to you from the Serbian Red Cross on a pilot study that she did on exploitation of older women. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everyone in New York. It is my great privilege and honor to address you on the occasion of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. My name is Natasha Todorovic, and I'm a health and care manager in Red Cross of Serbia and in PIA country representative for Serbia. In the past 17 years, I have been working in aging-related issues. One of the focuses on my work is elder abuse. In Serbia, like in other countries, it is visible that financial hardship of the society at large, causing, among other things, increasing unemployment, lead to higher risk of financial abuse of older people. This is not limited to the countries going through transition, but can be witnessed in any country going through financial crisis, especially in the post-2008 environment. According to official data, with a high unemployment rate in Serbia, the rate of participation of pensions in household income is increased. There are societal expectations in Serbia of older people to support their families, children, grandchildren, for as long as possible, almost regardless of their own needs. Older people are expected to not only devote their time to their families, but also to provide finances from their own incomes, often preventing them from meeting their own material needs. This creates a culture of self-sacrifices, and it explains the relatively low recognition and reporting of financial abuse of older people in Serbia. The most recent published research of older people, well-kept family secret, elder abuse, was done by the Red Cross of Serbia with UNFPA support in 2015 via telephone, covering 800 older persons. The research looking in all the forms of elder abuse showed that half of all the older people who reported experiencing abuse can be exposed to the financial abuse. 13.5% of interviewees state that they do not have complete control of how they use their finances. At the same time, 54% have reporting using their income to support the other members of household. Many older people do not perceive this as financial abuse. Some of the reason along the lines of, I am old now and I don't really need the money anymore. Others need it more badly than I do. In the latest research done 2016, 98.7 interviewees who had reported their money being taken did not want to answer the question on who is taking their money without knowledge or consent. Additionally, here are the 3 characteristic forms of financial abuse. Being talked into waiving their rights to inherit their deceased partner, poorly regulated lifelong support contracts, and being deprived of legal capacity through court action. Older people may especially at risk of abuse of personal circumstances such as social isolation, cognitive impairment, bereavement, and financial pressures. It should be underlined that older women are more likely to be targeted by financial abuse. Women who are widowed, divorced, or unmarried are especially in high risk. Wives surviving their husband are often pressured by their children to not claim their part in the inheritance, making them economically dependent. This is especially true for more patriarchal community and families in rural area in Serbia. To conclude, the issue of financial abuse of older people is a very serious problem, both at the personal and society level. It is grossly unrecognized and consequently underreported. Part of the problem is that is a consensus with prejudice related to ageism, and these prejudices are internalized by older people as well. Financial abuse violates basic human rights of older people, and what makes the matters worse is that older people often are not informed about their rights. Even if they are aware of what their rights are, the access to those rights is often so complicated that it is akin to being caught in a spider web. We strongly believe that civil society has an important part to play in tackling the issue of financial abuse of older people, both in advocacy for better legislation to better capture this complex phenomenon and in ensuring the effective implementation of existing legislation. Last but not least is the role of civil society in raising the awareness about the phenomenon, both among older people and decision makers and the society as a whole. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you successful continuation of the meeting. Warm greetings from Serbia.
Well, thank you for listening so diligently to these videos and the lessons that we're learning from the different areas. But now we're going to give you a live presentation. So be ready for this. And, we heard some of the issues that Nadja was talking about, the social protection issue, where if you were disempowered by not having an economic base to protect yourself, that's a great problem. And often you were giving away your economic and your financial financial means because of family pressures and cultural beliefs and pressures. So these are things that we need to, work with and not against, but to work to protect older persons and to help them to learn about their rights to protect themselves. So we're going to move to another area now, and Professor Suzanne Sepperstein is from Generations United, and she's also going to make another little correction in the program about her position here today, but she's going to talk to you about remittances and exploitation within that process. Very important area. Please, Professor.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you on behalf of the committee. Thank you so much, Susan. I want to thank you in terms of the Committee on Aging, and I want to thank Dr. Rosa Resnick, the chair of the subcommittee on intergenerational relationships, of which I am a member. I am not a member of there's no subcommittee on migration that I'm aware of. So just in terms of correction. My background is that I am a sociologist. I was chair of the Department of Sociology and Gerontology at Dowling College till it closed exactly 1 year ago today. So you will please forgive me as I begin with a sociological explanation, because that's how I understand and see the world. And if you would just sort of keep up with me and move ahead, keep going. Okay. So I'll start with the definition of a remittance. A remittance is a transfer of money by a foreign worker to an individual in his or her own country. The scope of the remittances are that in 2014, 436 billion with a B went to developing countries, setting a new record. Overall global remittances totaled 582 billion in 2015. In 2014, India received an estimated 70 billion from expats. In 2014, China received an estimated 64 billion. So according to World Bank estimates, remittances will total 585 billion in 2016, of which 442 billion went to developing countries that involve 250 million migrant workers. So you can see that this is a huge issue. Emile Durkheim. He is considered the father of modern sociology, and he based his work on the sociologist Auguste Comte. And the reason this is important is that for him, the basis of society is a moral order. And as we understand what remittances are, you will see where the moral order and the values and the trust become so important. According to Durkheim, agreements are not possible unless each partner trusts the other to live up to them. For example, if I work, you agree to pay me. I agree to work with the expectation that you will pay me. This argument rests on an underlying basis that we will uphold the agreement. The underlying agreement is based on trust, or what Durkheim called pre-contractual solidarity, which must exist before contracts can be depended upon. Society is based on a common moral order rather than on rational self-interest, because if not, you would take the money and run. Tremendously productive cooperation is possible if everyone identifies with the common goal. Foreign remittances are based on trust, so this is very important and the reason for that introduction. Durkheim continued that people in society have a collective conscience, a sense of belonging to a community with others, feeling a moral obligation to live up to its demands. Laws are an indicator of moral norms, a general indication of how people conceive right and wrong. And then there are two kinds of laws, criminal and civil administrative, and of course the punishments differ. There's formal laws for formal relationships, and that would be retribution, would be an eye for an eye. For the violation of the civil administrative law results merely in restitution. So the consequences are different. If you violate the formal laws, there's prison, fines, the loss of job, for when you have formal foreign remittance laws. And violations of informal rules result in informal sanctions, shunning, exclusion, excommunication, also the loss of a job. Foreign remittances occur throughout the world. Keep going, please. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. I'm speaking fast. Go. Okay. Throughout the world. In China, it's called Fei Qian. In Pakistan, Bangladesh, Hundi. India and the Middle East, we have a system of Hawala. The Philippines, Padala. Hong Kong, forgive my pronunciation, Huquan. And in Thailand, Fei Quan. So informal remittance systems exist in many countries and are called with various names, but they have similar, and in fact, very similar dynamics. So the informal systems are also called alternative remittance systems, underground banking, ethnic banking, informal value transfer systems. Okay, formal systems include the official banking channels. Informal systems include money transfers, which occur through private, unrecorded channels. Private transfers include remittances brought home by friends, relatives, and even the migrant himself. Now, the basic way that it works is that in order for them to take place, you need to have a remitting party, 2 remittance service providers, 1 in each country, and a recipient. And so that's actually a diagram which you can look at some point in time, but we will continue. Okay, so let me give you an example of the process. When the remitting party, for example, a Somali migrant worker in Italy wants to send money to Mogadishu, he makes payment in euros or another convertible currency to a remittance agent or middleman in Rome. The service provider contracts a partner service provider in the other country, who might be a shopkeeper in the receiving country, who arranges payment in local or other currency to the remitter's family or other beneficiary on the production of a pre-agreed reference. As a form of identification for the transaction, the agent in the remitting country provides the remitter a code or reference which must be passed on to his designated beneficiary for presentation to the agent in the recipient country. It used to be 2 pieces of paper that were torn in half that had to match, but now they've gone to passports and IDs and so on. Once the funds have been paid, the 2 people are happy, and then simply the remitting parties have to deal with bookkeeping issues, and there are ways they can do this. So you can see how important the element of trust is in the transaction. So the characteristics of informal remittances are that they are reliable, inexpensive, speedy, accessible, convenient ways of transferring funds. They follow the waves of immigration, and they use minimal or no documentary requirements. Now, there are reasons for this, and shortly you'll see the consequences of that. In Europe, as well as host countries in the Americas, migrants have an implicit contract or a tacit agreement that ensures that the migrant supports the family and provides insurance against farm failures or other financial problems. In turn, the family finances the migrant's initial travel and living costs and aids the migrant during gaps in employment in the host country and includes him in their future inheritances. However, as time passes, with the migrant growing less likely to return home, remittance behavior shifts from that based on an implicit contract model to less obligatory payments motivated by altruistic motives and investments. Over time, remittances shift from obligatory to more discretionary payments. So you see trust, and now we're going to look at what happens with the violation. Okay, in informal remittance systems, trust is key, but so far, the trust customers rarely lose their money. Informal dispute resolution processes among service providers have also made it an efficient payment system that attracted little attention by regulators in developed countries until recently. Unfortunately, the system's success, speedy transactions with minimal or no documentation, has also been its undoing. Anonymity that is possible with such transactions has raised concern in the law enforcement community, particularly since 9/11. Concern about evasion of currency controls, et cetera, have changed the environment, and there are now calls for more effective regulatory and supervisory frameworks of informal transmitting systems as well. Formal remittances of developing countries total over $167 billion in 2005. The level of the actual amount of informal remittances is virtually unknown because they tend to flow through unrecorded channels. Estimates of the size of the informal remittances vary widely, from 35 to 250% of formal remittances. For poor households in Latin America and the Caribbean and so on, foreign remittances comprise about 1/2 or more of the household income. 80 to 85% are used to cover basic family necessities, food, housing, utilities, and these remittances are used to benefit the families and as investments in the future. Families use them to pay for school for their children, thereby investing in human capital for the next generation. So remittances provide an enormous range of potential opportunities for individual families, local communities, and national economies. Now, only recently has Europe started to recognize the importance of remittances in their culture. Cost comparison, next. Between the formal and informal systems. It is more expensive to transmit money through the formal systems. The average cost of remitting money in 8 Latin American countries was above 10% of the amount being sent. This was in 2006. Now, the cost has still dropped, but it's still much higher than charged by the informal controls. So from a policy perspective, the formal remitting systems, the bank, want to decrease their costs so they can be more competitive with the informal systems, and there are all sorts of benefits for the countries. Okay, we will keep moving on because I want to now move on to the financial abuse in my remaining minute. Now that we have some idea of what the system is about, let's look at the potential for abuses. Now, this kind of abuse dealing with remittances is part of financial abuse in general, and as we already heard, who is most likely to commit these abuses? Family members, for starters. Some of you may recall the Brooke Astor situation here in New York, 104-year-old woman who was a major philanthropist and so on. And the family feels that the money is really theirs, let's just get it, and greed is the major motivation. There are also other people who are grifters, and then there are professionals who simply take advantage because they're not nice people. My generation said follow the money. Many old people have a lot of money, so that's why they go after them. This is important because why don't they come out when they are taken advantage of? Why don't they come out and fight back? Many of them lack proper papers, ID papers. Their source of income may be illegal, the underground economy, working off the books, lack of financial and computer literacy. They're unsophisticated. They fear the authorities in their host countries, and they fear the authorities in their country of birth. They fear the issue of deportation. So what can we do? We need to look for patterns of abuse, and there are a whole bunch of issues of who is at risk and what these patterns are. And these are legal violations. And the question is, what can be done to stop the abuse and the crimes that are being committed? And so there are various federal agencies which are listed, including the FBI, Social Security, et cetera. But most of these crimes are fought at the state level. In fact, New York has a bill right now before it, and it probably won't be passed because they feel that it would be a negative stereotyping of older people. There are recommendations from ARP, from Australia, et cetera. Conclusion. Family values and intergenerational relationships. Financial remittances depend on strong family values transmitted across and between generations, intergenerational connections which endure across time and space and develop into transnational networks that change over time. As with any other transactions or relationships, some flourish and some are abused. In commemoration of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, we focus on what can go wrong. We should also remember on how often things go right to benefit individuals, families, communities, and nations. We should commit at all levels to limit the abuses and punish those who perpetrate them. Awareness, education, and the law are our tools, and so I thank you.
And okay, that was done in a New York minute, let's face it, okay? So thank you very much, and we certainly did learn a lot. But one of the things we learned is that, these systems that have been working for many, many years may be at risk for many reasons that we all discuss in other areas. And, it's a concern that member states and civil society need to be working on and recognize. Thank you very much for that. Just very quickly, because we're running out of a little bit of time, I'm going to make a move in the projected program here today. And I'm going to ask Mr. Cortes of the Human Rights Office, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, to move his presentation up. And then we also have two people who have to leave. The computer might be leaving us, but also Chris will go next, and then I will go after because you also have a train or something you have to catch. Would it be convenient for you? All right, thank you very much. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much. Christian Cortes from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you on behalf of the office for the invitation to the organizers. I just want to maybe recall the mandate of the open-ended working group and try to tie it with some of the things that have been said here. The purpose of the open-ended working group on aging is strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons by considering the existing international framework of human rights of older persons and identifying possible gaps and how best to address them, including by considering as appropriate the feasibility of further instruments and measures. And the issue that has been put on the table today is one of the excellent examples about gaps and issues that are not well captured by the existing human rights framework. If you think about how to frame the issue of financial abuse in the context of existing human rights, you need to go to the existing instruments and try to find what are the boxes there where you can fit the issue. The general instrument that covers civil and political rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, has a provision on the right to physical and personal integrity, which is framed in a way that is really inconvenient to feature this issue. It says, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. In particular, no one shall be subjected without his free consent to medical and scientific experimentation. This is framed in 1966, and I mean, clearly the language does not envisage a situation as the ones that we have been deciding. There's another article when you can say might be used, and it's the right to private and personal life, a family life. It's Article 17. It says, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to unlawful attacks on his honor and reputation. Again, we'll discuss a bit, but to what degree these texts are adequate to capture this phenomenon. Another issue that one can bring is, well, it seems that financial abuse is linked with the right to property, so abuses to financial assets had to. The right to property is not a universally recognized human right. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Economic, Social, and Cultures were adopted during the Cold War, and there was a dispute on whether considering property a universal right. But you find some of these rights in regional instruments. So the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights or the European Convention mention the right to property. If you read the way in which these rights were framed, you will also see that there's some issue in framing the issue. Because everyone has the right to the use and enjoyment of property. The law must subordinate subordinate such use and enjoyment to the interest of society. No one shall be deprived of his property except upon payment of just compensation for reasons of public utility or social interest, and in the cases according to the forms established by law. If you see these clauses, you see that the kind of image that is underlying is state action, so abuses that come from state action. And the main point made before by all the presentations and also by the independent expert on the human rights of older persons is exactly that most of the cases of financial abuse happen not in a situation where the state abuses persons, but mostly in their intimate circle. It's families, it's either care providers, is non-profit or for-profit or market or businesses. So this is an issue that's not very well captured by the provisions I read before. This same issue was faced by other groups that are protected by specific human rights clauses. So, for example, CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, had, if you read the text, there's no clear provision there prohibiting violence against women, which seems like really. So the CEDAW was adopted in 1979. It entered into force in 1981, and only in 1992, through a general recommendation of the committee, the idea of violence against women as a compound violation of the convention was put together by the committee in a document that some states still consider to be non-binding. So it was the idea of violence against women that mostly happens through action that comes from private parties, not from state parties, was basically framed and put together by the committee in its interpretive task, not in the text. So it's only in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that was adopted in 2006 that there's some hints on exploitation, violence, and abuse as a phenomenon that is mostly committed in private-to-private relations. Say, state parties shall take appropriate legislative, administrative, social, education measures to protect persons with disabilities, both within and outside the home, from all forms of exploitation, violence, and abuse, including their gender-based aspects. As it has been said once and again during the working group, not all other persons are persons with disabilities, so not all other persons are covered. And then not all other persons want to be considered persons with disabilities. So this protection that only will benefit older persons with disabilities is too narrow in terms of capturing some of the issues that we have been discussing here. So I would say, as a conclusion, the issues that are gaps in the existing protection need to be showcased in a clear manner and show the universal scope of this phenomenon. I think the kind of interventions we had here and the knowledge you have as human rights advocates for older persons will be a very important asset for the next session of the Open Working Group, where one of the issues that is going to be focused on is neglect, violence, and abuse. So this is a kind of interventions that would open the eyes of member states in order to show that the existing framework of human rights instruments is insufficient in terms of capturing those issues that are the important issues for older persons. So I want to encourage you to bring this information and to make the case about the fact that most of the existing clauses are, to some degree, narrow and insufficient to capture this issue, and the opportunity of discussing a new framework is the opportunity to bring the issues that are clearly drafted in a way that capture these issues that we have been discussing here. So thank you for your attention, and I think I've been succinct enough. Thanks.
Did you like that, Helen? I know. Well, we could play it again. And we will, many times. Because, talk about pearls of wisdom. We learn so much from everyone. But sometimes what we learn is disturbing. However, very interesting. So thank you very, very much, Christiane. And we're going to use all of this moving forward towards the eighth session of the Open-Ended Working Group. We're going to piece this together and get stronger. Well, there are some actions and some organizations that have been for many years, taking great steps and strides to work against financial exploitation. And one of them has been AARP, ARP. I worked hand in glove with the New York people and the national people on telemarketing fraud and all sorts of things. There was not even identity fraud back then. That was so long ago. But here's Chris, and he is the New York State representative for AARP, and he's going to talk to us about a fantastic program they have to help keep funds safe. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for moving me up on the agenda. I apologize, it was a scheduling error on my part. But I want to talk a little bit about AARP's Bank Safe initiative. And so this is part of, and you can go to the next slide, AARP's, we have a network called the Fraud Watch Network, and it's really focused on identity theft and finding ways to end this, the fastest growing form of elder abuse in the country and probably getting close to worldwide. But when you look at financial exploitation is a growing problem. It affects not only older Americans but also financial institutions. And it's a smart decision for the end user, right, who is you and I and that person that has the money and the assets, but it's also a smart business decision by these institutions, right? I mean, they have a lot to lose here. And so we look at this as the perfect opportunity for a partnership and really educating the bankers that there is a lot at stake for their business. And I'll show you why it becomes so important. Next slide, please. Right, so we know the aging demographic, right? We know it's going to be very old very soon. By 2050, more older people than younger people in the world, as the ambassador mentioned, right? So demographics are our destiny here. And when you look at, when you put that next to the growing complaints by older people that feel that they have fallen victim to some type of financial exploitation, that is also increasing. Next. And just click one more time, right? So the average victim is taken for $120,000. Average. Well, it'll make sense when you see the total number, right? Just click it one more time, please. But the average retirement savings at 50 is only $108,000. I think it's clear what this means, that when people are falling victim, often it is making them absolutely financially insecure at retirement because it's eroding almost all the savings that they have. We know you need more than $108,000 to retire comfortably, but you can see that this exploitation is just is robbing people literally of their savings. Next slide, please. So the financial industry loses roughly $1 billion in a year because of these exploitations, which affects their deposit. That's money that could be going into their banks where they make interest and it's safe. But that's the statistic that I think is the grab for many of the institutions that are that we're looking to partner with. Next slide, please. So the overall cost annually is $47 billion a year here in the United States, just in the United States, okay? So that is what people are losing annually when it comes to financial exploitation. Next slide, please. So why are so many people targeting older folks? Next slide, please. Right, so Willie Sutton, a famous American bank robber, said, "I rob banks because that's where the money is." Well, that's where the money is when it comes to older adults. So if you look at the next slide, here in the United States, older Americans own 2/3 of all bank deposits, and it's estimated that 1 in 5 are a victim of some type of financial exploitation. Looking more internationally, just across the ocean, next slide please, in England, residents 60 and older already own the majority of the country's wealth, and that population, as we know here in England, is continuing to grow, right? So the more that population is growing, they maintain that wealth, they are certainly going to be the target. Next slide, please. So we have a 1-2 punch. One, it's to educate the consumers, right? We want to make sure that we are letting people know what is at stake and what they need to do to protect themselves. And we have a very comprehensive program where we're constantly working with the communities in every state to educate them. But we also need to make sure that we're looping in the financial industry and what can they do on their end, because they do take this seriously and they do want to be an active partner, but we need to sort of help them along with that, right? So next slide, please. So we are partnering with banks, institutions, and I'll show you a list in a second of who they are, just a short list. But we have training, right? So we have a national online training program that will help employees in financial institutions detect and prevent exploitation. We want to highlight and showcase some of the best practices because there are best practices happening, and I'll talk about a couple of them. And then partnerships, where can we actually have formal partnerships to help get that word out? Next slide, please. So if you look at some of the more notable pioneers in this, First Financial of Texas, Credit Union, Barclays of the UK, Lloyd's of London, Bank of America, Fork. These are all some of the first institutions to come out and say we need to do this. They need to make sure that not only their practices detect these types of financial abuses, but also that their employees who want to be willing participants, they really want to do this, because in many places we have a lot of community banks where they've seen the same person over and over, and they are in many ways the first line of defense, but really without the proper training and the resources, well, what are they to do, right? And we can't make sure that we are interfering too deeply in their lives, but we also need to recognize what is happening, right? It is a loss of money, but it's also a loss of independence. Many caregivers, are affected because they're the ones who have to try to sort this out in the end. And I think once you're exploited like this, like any type of abuse, it can have long-lasting mental ramifications. And we know with the prevalence of dementia now more than ever that these types of programs are needed. Suzanne mentioned that on the state level there's legislation, and we're really 2 more days of session or 3 more days of session left in Albany before they leave for the year. And there's some really good bills, but the opposition is saying, well, we don't want to interfere, we don't want to meddle, we don't want to stereotype older people that they can't manage their finances. The reality is that they need help. We're not saying cut them off from their money, but at least raise a flag to make sure that this is happening. If somebody has a history of banking over 25 years and they've been doing the same thing, and then there's these outrageous transactions happening, somebody has to step in and say, wait, did you want this? Right? I mean, a simple question, or have a protocol where we are inviting the proper authorities in to make that decision, right? We don't want to put it necessarily on that teller or that person at the institution, but what can they do? How can they troubleshoot this? Next slide. So 4 out of 5 older customers prefer establishing accounts at a bank that offers some type of reputable monitoring service or that has some type of program in place. And right, we know this population is growing. We know that they have the wealth here and across the world. And so we have to figure out ways to incentivize our institutions to step up and be partners with this, because they have a lot to lose, but also that person has a lot to lose, not only financially, but I think their own sense of security. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I think this is a fantastic example of a good practice. You mentioned a few things. Okay, so you started out with violence yourself with the 1-2 punch, you know, and here we are advocating against violence. However, when it's needed, no. We like the point very much that it's a voluntary situation, that banks can learn how to report and how to help keep their depositors safe when it's necessary, and that older persons don't all need somebody looking over their shoulder at all. But there are times when they are taken in because they're trusting, because they don't expect the worst from other humans. That's the way they're brought up mostly, and to trust each other and to trust someone's word and a handshake. And unfortunately, that really plays against them. But I like the fact mostly that it's not a mandatory thing, but it's a voluntary action. And I really appreciate everything that ARP does.
Thank you.
And we look forward to more. We have lots of handouts, so we'll start to pass them out. And we excuse you.
Thank you.
And
This
thank
is
you very,
wonderful.
very much, Chris. So we're just going to step back a second. I'm not going to take long because I have a guest here. May I call upon you, my guest, to say a few words? To check a tape? May I call upon you to say a few words, or you're not speechless? No. We had a conversation. You could introduce yourself a little bit, please, and then perhaps we could say a few words about the rights and the land rights issue, which is another problem for older persons around the world, particularly widows, and land grabbing and land rights issues.
Yes, thank you, Susan. I had a chat with Susan yesterday. She had approached our mission to see if we could participate in this event, but unfortunately I've been too busy. I was unable to respond to her inquiries. And even now I have a delegation here which had come to attend the CRPD, which only ended yesterday, but some of the members of the delegation are still in New York. And so, but I found time to come and listen to this very, very informative discussion here. Now, she had shown me some pictures of some widows in my country who were being pushed out of their land by their in-laws. And I was lucky, Susan, I may inform you that my delegation was still here, and we shared that submission to us. And they are going to make the necessary investigation to find out what really happened. Because widowhood is a very common institution in my country. I could illustrate that with myself. Since I was born, I have known widows. In my own family, my aunt was a widow from 1973 to 2013. My mother also was a widow. My uncle left a widow, which she's still there now, 94 years of age now. On my mother's side, there were 9 in their family, 5 sisters, 4 brothers. Before I was 10, all my mother's sisters were widowed. So it's a very common occurrence, which was exacerbated by the HIV and AIDS pandemic. We have much, much younger widows in my country. And this is an area that could potentially cause problems. I could use my example also to illustrate the video that she sent to us. I lost my young brother in 2012. He left a wife with 2 kids, 1 4 years, 1 7 months. Now, in our culture, it's very important for me, in my family, we were 4. Now we are only left 2. I left a sister and my young brother. I've got an elder brother. It's our responsibility, me and my elder brother, to look after the family that was left by my young brother. So we had to sit down with the widow that was left by my young brother. She's young, a young woman. Now, she has 2 options: to remain part of the Chekeche family, or to move on and get married elsewhere and start life afresh. But the situation in Zimbabwe is that the majority of the women, they don't opt out. They stay within the family. That gives the responsibilities on both sides. When you opt to remain in the family, it means you are still technically a daughter-in-law in the married family. And you must maintain your status. So my sister-in-law would have to maintain her status as it is if she opts to remain in the family, and enable the members of the family to collectively look after her. It's very important in our culture to ensure that she does not struggle. Now, problems will arise when she opts to stay in the family, and then after some years down the line, she falls pregnant. She has cut off or broken the sanctity of that relationship with that married family. So this is where examples of people trying to push the widow may come from. But otherwise, culturally in my country, there is no push whatsoever. Every family has widows. It is either your mother, your daughter, or your sister. And nobody wants to ill-treat these. Mothers are institutions of love. Culturally, we have very strong emotional attachment to our mothers. We can do anything to ensure that our mothers are safe. When the father goes, even the sons have an obligation to look after the daily needs of the mother. We don't send our parents to old homes in the villages. This is not our culture. Society will frown on that very, very much. We have an obligation to look after them in the village. So it is not possible that a widow left in the village would have very strong push from the in-laws. There has to be other dynamics of the relationship that would create that kind of situation.
Well, thank you very much for your intervention and your insight. We can discuss this a lot further and look at those dynamics because you were explaining them very clearly to me. Even though you have very strong laws, sometimes things slip through because of different dynamics, and that's what we want to follow up at a later meeting. And so I really appreciate your coming and talking to us. And clearly, with issues of land grabbing and land rights, which land rights is a big issue here at the United Nations, maybe not exactly in the same way we're thinking of it with regards to widows being deprived of their own assets more than their land, their cars, their children at sometimes. But there's also many vulnerable people in other parts of the world. There are farmers who are vulnerable when there's certain things happening. Elderly farmers can be pushed off their land. Sometimes they're too weak to fight back because they don't have the resources, they don't have the wherewithal to do that. And we have a very nice piece of work that was done by James Blackburn when he was with Help Age International that I'm going to distribute with regards to how the Inter-American Convention would help to protect against some of these things, and hopefully now we will see that playing out because the Inter-American Convention is in force, and we will look to see how that's working. And of course in Africa we also have the protocol for the rights of older persons that's going from country to country now for ratification also. So there's a lot of promising things going on, but we have a big job to do here in the next few weeks. 4th of July, we'll have all sorts of fireworks, and then we'll start the 8th session of the open-ended working group and hope that there's no fireworks at the end, Ambassador. Oh, maybe there will be. If there are any to celebrate, exactly. So at this point, if there are any particular questions, we've got a couple of minutes left, and perhaps we could take some questions or some other comments or observations. Brief, if it's an observation, brief. Oh, yes. Okay.
Struck me was the issue of older people having so little money really available to for their own retirement. And yes, most of it is taken away in scams, but it's also they're so vulnerable because they're aware they have so little money, so they're very vulnerable to get-rich-quick schemes. So they're really perfect prey, and that's what's motivating them. Also, it's a bad match.
Thank you very much for that, Kathy. Just a question for you, Christian. You mentioned that you hope that a lot of what we learned today could be brought to the July open-ended working group on aging, and the question I think some of us have is, how is that best done? Are there going to be roundtable panels? Since it's one of the two topics, what would you like us to be able to help you to make sure this information gets conveyed?
So part of the question is more institutional. What will be the frame? And I think that the ambassador is in a best position to give you but I think, regardless of the institutional arrangements, there would be a space to discuss the issue. And I think states tend to be shy on this. What states usually do is they tell you about their legislation. I have a piece of legislation. It's you, NGOs, that bring the flavor of what is going on. That's it. So empirical evidence about these issues happening, the amount of the scope of the issues, and the fact that these issues repeat themselves, replicate themselves in different parts of the world is a very important argument that should come particularly from you.
We have another question here.
I was going to respond
sorry, okay.
to her about the framework of the 5th, 6th, and 7th of July. We are going to have 6 sessions, and we are going to have panelists. And one of the subjects will be this one. So we can come again over the same issue and discuss it with the NGO, with all the panelists and states members, of course, that are going to be there.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Mission of Morocco. First of all, thank you for convening this very important event, and also I'll be looking forward to exchanging and participate in the next session. Just a small, quick question. I don't know if I can call it question because it's still a dilemma and being discussed at different levels. When thinking strategically, one is often stuck between two things. And let me keep it really simple because it's a really complicated issue, but let me make it this way. Just go on with the preserving the traditional intergenerational ties between different generations and keeping the parents, grandparents at home. And this is the traditional way, at least in Morocco, and having it. So, or the second part, pushing for also the independence, the autonomy of persons, older persons, and having their own lives, but with all the cons and problems that we have to tackle. So these are two really important issues. I'm for both of them, actually, as long as the older person, are happy the way they want to live. So this is a kind of dilemma that we often find during our discussions, and wish, I don't know, maybe during this next session we will have time to discuss that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is the pressing question, and in all cultures, actually. We have many of the same issues, and we don't want to toss the culture and traditions out when they're good and protective for all people of all ages. However, it's the individual who has the rights, who holds the rights, and it's that they're entitled to. So that is a question, and why don't we try to have a session, perhaps even an informal session during the open-ended working group and talk that out? I think that's really a great idea, so that we all, can put in our issues and discuss that. So let's thank you, Morocco, very much for that. Thank you. And now, shall I turn it over to the ambassador again?
Well, the closing remarks, and I think it was very, very, thank you, Susan, very fruitful, and we have listened to and saw these videos from different parts of the world, and it encourages more and more to go forward with this work, and the necessity to have instrument, an international instrument that protect other people. I came, and now I was a little bit more concerned than before, after I learned that how much money is stolen from the elder people. Right. And I'm scared because I'm more than 60 years, so I became also a target. Maybe by my own family, friends, and neighbors. So now I will look around my own group with some other eyes, and we should do that, and with the help maybe of the financial institutes, so they can secure more our money. Well, I was reading, if I have with me, the program of the next working group meeting that we will have next month, 5th, 6th, and 7th of July. It's not with me, but maybe I can. I think you have it, all the program that we are going to have, and the subjects, yes, and everything. So maybe we, yes, can send to all of you, okay, so you're prepared for your statements, discussions, and questions. And I hope we can have all of you there. It will be on room 1, 2, it's a big room here in the UN. So I hope we can really have a full attendance. And of course, before the meeting, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us, me directly or my staff. So I hope you see all there. Thank you very much for this event.
Thank you very, very much.